Afters by Oleanderhoney. Chapter 5. Conductor of Light. Summary. Neither here nor there. The power goes out at 221 p. Dr. Major Barrington killed his wife. Sherlock just knows. But he can't figure out how. It was beyond frustrating, especially seeing as how his mind kept drifting over irrelevant facts. Mrs. Barrington, primary school teacher, 48 years of age, Aquarius, frequent Regent Country Club member, cat owner, widowed, remarried to Dr. Barrington in 2006. Dr. Barrington, widower of 10 years before Mrs. Barrington. Doctor who owns a private practice, 53, Taurus, penchant for golf, smoker, graduated from Oxford, well off. No need for the life insurance that he no doubt cashed in after his wife's death was ruled as heart failure. So no clear motive. Sherlock paces back and forth, intent on wearing a hole in the floor. He calls out to Jane twice to make him tea before he remembers she isn't home from the surgery yet. For some reason, this irritates him even more until his pent-up frustration gets the best of him, and he stops dead center and yells, to no one in particular, obscenities at the ceiling, in 3 different languages. Then, as if the whole bleeding universe was against him, the power promptly goes out. Fully aware that he is on the verge of throwing a tantrum like a 4-year-old, and supremely beyond caring at this point, he flops down onto the floor in a huff, with his legs crossed at first, before giving in and sprawling out flat on his back, arms and legs akimbo. Hopefully the blood currently pooling at the base of his skull would help jumpstart his synapses. Wishful thinking, probably. He doesn't know how long he lays there, staring into the dark, before he hears Jane's familiar tread on the staircase. "Power out, then," Jane says, stating the obvious. Sherlock curls his toes indignantly within his expensive leather shoes. "You really are on sparkling form tonight, Jane," he says sarcastically. Jane chuckles good-naturedly, letting the jibe roll off her back. It irritates him further, and he flings an arm dramatically over his eyes while he listens to her rummage around in the kitchen for the torch they kept there for such emergencies. "Why are you on the floor?" she asks a moment later, and Sherlock can feel her step over him on her way to the fireplace. "I need to think. I was hoping a change in perspective would help me see," he grumbles. He lowers his arm and watches as the weak glow of the fire steadily gets brighter, casting shadows on the stuccoed ceiling. "Is it working?" Jane finally asks, and she leans back until she's lying on the floor likewise, their heads next to each other, and their feet pointing in opposite directions, like some sort of a human yin-yang. Sherlock turns and finds her looking at him, the orange of the flames making her irises look like molten gold. "No, not yet," he sighs, his black mood dissipating slightly at her presence. She sighs and folds her hands over her stomach. "When I was a little girl, I used to make pictures out of my textured ceiling before I went to sleep at night," Jane says in a dreamy voice. "We've got a perfect one for that," she says, and gestures to said ceiling in question. "How quaint of you," Sherlock says, but the remark is devoid of its usual acerbity. Between Jane lying next to him and the steady warmth of the fire, he is beginning to relax despite himself. "Yep, I think I can see Father Christmas. And the Titanic and the particularly interesting cluster of drywall just there," Jane points. And Sherlock tries and fails to follow her line of sight, and fails to see the point in the exercise as well. What about you? What do you mean? Do you see anything? Apart from an appalling amount of no doubt cancer-inducing asbestos, he snorts, and she flicks him against the cheek. Hey! Use your imagination, you bug. It might help get your mind off the problem for a bit, so when you return to it, you'll be more fresh. This is ridiculous, Sherlock says, and squints at the ceiling. Just try it. What else are you going to do with the power out anyway? He gives a lengthy sigh and looks up at the dancing peaks and valleys cast by the light. After a moment, he says, "The molecular structure of cocaine, and next to it, the double helix of a strand of DNA." Only you would see DNA. Jane laughs, shaking her head. Where? There. He points. Where is it? She asks again, and shuffles close to him to where their cheeks are nearly touching. Her soft hair whispers against his skin, and he can smell her shampoo and the scent of disinfectant and apple blossoms. Are you blind? Right there, Jane, he says, and grabs her hand so he can guide her finger to where he was indicating. It's a double helix in the process of replicating itself. Right, she says skeptically as they lower their arms. I think it looks like a cat. A cat? I thought you said the point of this was to use your imagination. He scoffs. A cat is imaginative, she says defensively, especially when he's wearing a smart-looking top hat right now. Really, Jane? Surely... Suddenly, Sherlock stops mid-sentence as the answer clicks into place. Oh! He breathes and looks at her. Even though the flat is still plunged into darkness, everything is stunningly bright. Brilliant. Resplendent. Jane. Sherlock? It was the cat, he says excitedly. Dr. Major Barrington's wife was allergic to their cat and was on a regimen of antihistamines to combat the symptoms. Seeing as how her husband was also her doctor and had access to the pharmacy his practice ran through, it would have been easy for him to cause the overdose which led to her heart failure. He got the pathologist over at St. Mary's to forge the tox screen. Neat! You solved it then? Jane says with a grin. Yes, it's all so obvious now, Sherlock says with a matching smile. He absently plucks an eyelash off of Jane's cheek and blows it off the tip of his finger. See, I knew this was a good idea. Sometimes you need to focus on something else for a while. Take a step back and observe something completely mundane. She closes her eyes and begins to hum happily under her breath. Sherlock continues to look at her as he lets her words sink in. She was right. This was exactly what he needed. A sort of respite for his brain, like a reset button. However, she was wrong about one thing. It wasn't the funny little game they were playing that did it. It was her. Her presence, her voice, even that familiar smell of clinic and hand lotion that was uniquely Jane. And she was anything but mundane. She was like a whetstone for his mind. She was like a dowsing rod leading him to things just under the surface. Incandescent. His conductor of light. So, you gonna let Greg know? She asks drowsily after a while, her eyes still closed. I will in a bit, he says, content to let her glow wash over them both. The end.